Hey, welcome back. Tonight, someone has to swing the axe, and afterward, that same someone still has to walk home, eat dinner, and somehow fall asleep in an ordinary bed like anyone else. You're not just hearing about a medieval executioner tonight, you're becoming one. And by the time we're done, you'll understand exactly what a job like this quietly does to a person. If you're enjoying these journeys into history, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now let your body sink into stillness. Let your breathing slow and let's step into that world together. It's worth pausing here on how someone actually ends up in this position because it's rarely a career choice made with any real enthusiasm. Sometimes the role passes down through families, father to son, generation after generation, inheriting a trade nobody particularly wanted, but somebody always has to carry it forward. Other times, it's simply the last job standing. Offered to men with nowhere else to turn, criminals given a choice between their own punishment and administering someone else's, or desperate townsfolk willing to take on work that pays reasonably well precisely because almost nobody else will touch it. The stigma attaches itself instantly, the moment you accept the role. In many towns, the executioner's own name gets quietly replaced by his title, the man himself fading slightly into the function he now performs. Some communities consider the profession so unclean that anyone who touches you afterward is expected to wash their hands. An oddly literal way of keeping death at arm's length. You didn't necessarily choose this out of any dark fascination or hidden cruelty. Most executioners, historical records suggest, were fairly ordinary men before the role reshaped how everyone, including themselves, understood who they were. It's not so different in its own uncomfortable way from any job today that quietly changes how people treat you the moment they learn what you do for a living. Except here, the reaction tends toward genuine fear rather than mild social awkwardness. Training, when it happens at all, comes from whoever held the position before you. An apprenticeship built less on formal instruction and more on watching closely, learning quickly, and understanding that mistakes here aren't measured in inconvenience. They're measured considerably more permanently than that. By the time you've accepted the role fully, you've also accepted something else, quieter, but just as real. Whatever life you had before this moment has effectively ended. What begins now is something else entirely. Lived at the edges of the very community you're still, technically, meant to serve. Your house sits at the edge of town, and that placement was never accidental. Executioners in this world tend to live physically apart from everyone else, a quiet architectural reminder that your presence, however necessary, isn't quite welcome among ordinary company. Simple daily errands become their own small negotiations. Some markets won't sell to you directly, forcing you to send someone else, or wait until a particular hour when fewer eyes are watching. Neighbors nod politely enough, but conversations end quickly. Pleasantries exchanged with the careful brevity of people who'd rather not linger. You've grown used to it, mostly, the way anyone grows used to a persistent, low-grade ache they've stopped expecting to disappear. Touch itself carries strange weight around you now. A handshake from you might prompt someone to wash their hands afterward, not out of any specific insult, simply reflex. An old superstition about cleanliness that's outlasted whatever logic originally created it. You've learned not to take it personally, though some days that's considerably easier than others. And yet, despite all this careful distance, you remain essential. The court needs you. The condemned, in whatever strange way, needs you too, someone skilled enough to make their final moment quick rather than prolonged. It's an uncomfortable contradiction to live inside, being simultaneously indispensable and unwelcome, needed constantly and embraced never. It's not entirely unlike any profession today that people quietly rely on while preferring not to think about too closely. The person who empties septic tanks, perhaps, or handles the parts of daily infrastructure nobody wants to picture directly. Except here, the discomfort runs considerably deeper, tangled up with life, death, and everything uncomfortable in between. Some evenings, sitting alone at the edge of a town that both needs and avoids you in equal measure, you find yourself wondering less about the work itself and more about what it might feel like to simply belong somewhere, fully, without qualification. It's not a thought that leads anywhere useful. You've learned to set it aside, the same way you've learned to set aside most thoughts that don't serve tomorrow's responsibilities. There's a common assumption that this work requires nothing more than strength and a willingness most people don't have. That's not entirely true, and the difference matters more than you might expect. A clean execution requires genuine skill, precision, timing, an understanding of exactly where and how to strike that took considerable practice to develop. A botched execution isn't simply embarrassing. It's dangerous, both for the condemned, who suffers unnecessarily, and for you, standing in front of a crowd that can turn hostile with startling speed. History remembers the executioners who struggled, who needed multiple attempts, considerably less kindly than it remembers the ones who worked quickly and cleanly. Reputation here isn't about prestige. It's about survival. You've practiced this more than you'd ever admit publicly. Technique refined through repetition, through careful study of exactly where muscle gives way to bone, exactly how much force accomplishes what's needed without excess, without unnecessary suffering. It's a strange kind of expertise to develop, one you'll never discuss proudly at a gathering, yet one that genuinely determines how much pain someone experiences in their final moment. There's an odd parallel here to any high-stakes profession today that demands precision under pressure. A surgeon, perhaps? Or someone diffusing something considerably more literal than a difficult situation. The stakes look different on the surface, but the underlying pressure, the absolute necessity of getting it right the first time, feels remarkably similar. Weather matters too, more than you'd expect. A rushed execution in freezing conditions, hands stiff and less responsive, carries genuine risk of error. You've learned to account for this, to warm your hands beforehand when possible. Small practical adjustments that most spectators never notice or consider. Focused as they are on everything except your preparation. By the time you're actually called upon to perform the task itself, all of this practice, all of this quiet, uncomfortable expertise collapses down into a single, decisive moment, one that will be over in seconds, yet somehow stays with you considerably longer than that. The town square fills earlier than usual today, word having spread the way it always does, quickly and with a kind of grim excitement most people would rather not admit to feeling. You arrive separately, deliberately, avoiding the main crowd. Your presence saved for the moment it's actually needed rather than paraded beforehand. The condemned is brought out under guard, and you've learned over time to look at this person carefully but briefly, gathering exactly the information you need: height, positioning, how steady they seem on their feet, without allowing yourself to gather much more than that. Names, backgrounds, the specific crime that brought them here. These details you've learned to let pass through you rather than settle in. A small mercy you extend to yourself as much as anyone. There's often a final ritual, a chance for last words, sometimes a prayer offered by a nearby priest, the crowd falling into an uneasy hush that feels different from silence born of respect, closer to the particular quiet of people who know something significant is about to happen and aren't entirely sure how they feel about watching it. When the moment arrives, everything you've practiced collapses into instinct. There's no room here for hesitation, no benefit to slowing down and reconsidering. Whatever emotion exists underneath the moment gets set aside entirely, filed away for later, because right now, precision is the only thing that actually matters, the only thing standing between a quick, clean end and genuine, unnecessary suffering. Afterward, the crowd's reaction varies more than you'd expect. Some cheer, an uncomfortable release of tension more than genuine celebration. Others go quiet, faces pale, having perhaps expected the spectacle to feel different than it actually did once witnessed directly. A few you've noticed over the years seem to watch you specifically. Curious about the person capable of performing this task at all, you collect your tools, step back, and allow yourself finally a single full breath, the kind you'd been unconsciously holding since this morning. The task is complete. What happens in your own mind afterward, that part, unfortunately, is only just beginning. It's a curious thing watching how the same crowd that fears you can, in the very next breath, treat you like something closer to a good luck charm. Fear and superstition, you've learned, aren't nearly as far apart as people like to pretend. There's a quiet trade that happens after executions, one nobody officially acknowledges but everyone somehow knows about. Certain items connected to the moment, a scrap of rope, occasionally something considerably more direct, are believed by some to carry healing properties, cures for everything from warts to more serious ailments. You've had people approach you afterward, voices lowered, asking for exactly these things, treating you less like the man who just performed an execution and more like someone standing unusually close to something powerful. Children are warned about you, told to behave or risk your attention, your name apparently useful for exactly the kind of bedtime discipline no parent wants to handle personally. You've heard mothers invoke you the way some might invoke a folk-tale monster. Only you're considerably more real, and occasionally you catch a child staring at you in the street with the particular wide-eyed fascination reserved for something simultaneously terrifying and irresistible to look at. Then there are the moments that surprise you more than they probably should. An older woman once thanked you quietly after a particularly difficult execution, telling you that you'd made it as painless as such a thing could possibly be for someone she'd known personally. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't condemnation either. Something more complicated sitting somewhere in between. It's not entirely unlike how people today might feel about certain necessary but uncomfortable professions. Simultaneously grateful someone's willing to do the work and quietly relieved it isn't them. The gratitude rarely translates into genuine closeness. It just means you're tolerated in a slightly different way than outright rejected. You've stopped expecting consistency from how people treat you, learning instead to simply notice it, catalog it, and move forward regardless. Whether feared, thanked, or treated as a walking superstition, The work tomorrow remains exactly the same either way. The walk home never quite feels like leaving work behind, not fully. Though you've developed small rituals over the years that help create at least the illusion of a boundary between what happened today and whatever ordinary evening waits for you now. You wash thoroughly before entering your own house, a habit that started practically and became something closer to ceremony over time. It's less about physical cleanliness and more about marking a transition, one version of yourself staying at the door while a different one, hopefully, steps inside to greet whatever family waits there. Your family has learned not to ask too many questions, and you've learned not to offer too many answers. It's an arrangement built on mutual protection more than secrecy. A shared understanding that some details are better left outside the walls of this particular home. Your children know what you do, in the broad sense that everyone in town knows. But the specifics stay carefully unspoken between you. One habit you've developed deliberately is never learning the names of the people whose deaths you've caused. It's easier this way, a small mercy you extend to your own mind, keeping the condemned as a role rather than a person, a function rather than someone's father, someone's son, someone with a life that existed before this morning and won't continue past it. You suspect, though you've never asked directly, that other men in this profession have developed similar quiet strategies of their own. Dinner, when it comes, tastes like dinner. Conversation, when it happens, sounds like ordinary conversation, weather, small-town gossip. Whatever mundane concerns occupy an evening that follows an entirely unremarkable day. It's strange how normal it can feel sitting at your own table. The same hands that held an axe this morning, now simply passing bread to your youngest child. Later, alone with your thoughts before sleep finally arrives. The day replays itself in fragments you'd rather not examine too closely. You've gotten better at this over the years, at compartmentalizing, at keeping today's work in its own separate room of your mind. Better, but never quite complete. Some nights, no amount of practiced distance keeps everything fully contained. Not every executioner manages to carry this weight quietly, and history, when you look closely enough, leaves traces of exactly how heavily it sometimes fell. Some turned to drink, evenings blurring into each other with the help of whatever local ale or wine could. Soften the edges of memory just enough to allow sleep. Others became known for a kind of hardened distance that unsettled even the people who'd hired them, a coldness that crept in gradually. The natural result, perhaps, of spending years deliberately not feeling too much. It's not so different from how any profession involving repeated exposure to trauma today. Emergency responders, soldiers, certain corners of medicine, tends to reshape the people doing that work, whether they intended or not. A few records mention executioners who eventually refused to continue, stepping back from the role despite the financial cost, unable to reconcile themselves with the accumulated weight of everything they'd done. Their replacements, notably, rarely lasted much longer before facing the same quiet reckoning. There are also scattered through Old Town records small hints of men who seemed to manage it better than others, finding some internal balance, some private philosophy that allowed the work to remain work rather than something that followed them home entirely. What separated them from the ones who broke down isn't entirely clear. Perhaps it was faith, perhaps simple temperament, perhaps, more likely, nothing more than luck in how their particular mind happens to be built. You think about all of this some nights, lying awake long after the household has gone quiet, wondering which category you'll eventually fall into. The ones who endure, or the ones who eventually can't anymore. It's not a question with a comfortable answer, and you've learned, mostly, to set it aside until it insists on being thought about, which it does occasionally, regardless of your preferences. Tonight happens to be one of those nights, the day's events replaying themselves in fragments you can't quite smooth over. You breathe slowly, deliberately, the way you've learned to when sleep feels further away than usual, and wait patiently for exhaustion to eventually do what willpower alone can't. Lying here now, the house finally settled into silence. It's worth sitting for a moment with everything this profession has quietly demanded of you. Not just today, but every day you've worn this role. Skill, certainly. Precision, always. But underneath all of that, something considerably harder to name. A willingness to carry weight most people never have to touch at all. There's a strange kind of duty running through work like this, one that doesn't ask whether you want to do it, only whether you're capable. Someone has to stand where you stand. Someone has to be the one who ensures a difficult moment passes as quickly and cleanly as it possibly can. It's not a role anyone envies, yet somehow it remains necessary, filled generation after generation by men willing to carry what most others simply couldn't. Perhaps that's the real story hidden inside a life like this one. Not cruelty, despite what the title suggests to strangers who've never looked closely. Something closer to endurance, a particular kind of strength built not from avoiding difficulty, but from walking directly into it, repeatedly, and finding some way to keep functioning afterward. You think briefly of all the other men who've worn this same weight before you. Some who broke under it eventually, others who somehow found their own quiet way through. You don't know yet which path is yours. Perhaps nobody ever fully knows until they're considerably further down it than they expected to be. For tonight at least, the day is finally fully over. And whatever tomorrow asks of you can wait until morning actually arrives. And with that, tonight's journey through the quiet, heavy world of the medieval executioner comes to its close. Wherever you're listening from, whatever weight your own day carried, there's nothing left for you to carry tonight. No task waiting, no weight to set aside for tomorrow. Just rest, arriving easier than it did for him and just as deserved. Sleep now. Tonight, there's nothing left to do but that.